At 2:30 in the afternoon on November 7th, high above the South China Sea, an American helicopter was carrying out a mission that made Beijing extremely nervous. In response, China immediately scrambled its most advanced attack helicopter, the Z-10, to intercept. But the Chinese pilot had no idea he was about to make a career-ending mistake. For the next 72 minutes, while trying to intimidate the most powerful navy on Earth, that pilot accidentally taught the Americans a lesson that Beijing never wanted them to learn. The Z-10 had taken off from Xiamen 28 minutes earlier, with a simple order: drive the Americans away. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy MH-60R Seahawk, often called the Swiss Army knife of American aviation, was tracking a Chinese Type 039 diesel submarine. That submarine had been submerged for 48 hours and was desperately trying to recharge its batteries. A diesel submarine is like holding your breath underwater. Sooner or later, you have to come up for air. And when it did, America was already waiting. 4 military aircraft? You are approaching Chinese airspace. Change your course immediately. The radio crackled as the Z-10 banked sharply across the Seahawk's nose at an altitude of 500 meters. But there was one small problem. They were 50 nautical miles from the Chinese coast, well within international airspace, where America had every legal right to operate. The Seahawk's 3-person crew, 2 pilots and 1 sensor officer, didn't flinch. They knew something Beijing didn't. During those 72 minutes, while China tried to intimidate, they unintentionally exposed their entire electronic secret. Those small bumps on the Seahawk's fuselage weren't for decoration. They were ALQ-210 electronic support pods, designed to capture every electronic signal emitted by the Z-10, radar frequencies, communication protocols, and engine vibrations. All were recorded. The Z-10, though fierce-looking, was in truth a budget imitation of the Apache, built by China using Russian technology from the 1990s. It looked intimidating, but much like a Toyota Camry with a body kit, it was only impressive on the outside. When the Chinese pilot fired 2 flares around the Seahawk, it wasn't an attack. It was pure theater, the aerial version of a small dog barking at a lion. In response, the American helicopter deployed its dipping sonar into the water below, sending a clear message: "We still see your submarine." The Chinese submarine panicked and crash-dived, creating such a loud acoustic signature that the entire U.S. carrier strike group could hear it. In submarine warfare, noise means death, and the Chinese pilot had just signed the death warrant for the very submarine he was trying to protect. When 90s Russian technology meets 21st century electronic warfare. At 2:48 in the afternoon, after 18 minutes of failure, the Chinese pilot finally managed to lock his radar onto the Seahawk. A sharp beep echoed in his headset. He thought he had won. That confidence lasted exactly 3 seconds, because immediately afterward, an American EA-18G Growler began blasting high-intensity electromagnetic waves at the Z-10 using its ALQ-99 jamming system. The Chinese radar instantly turned into a snowstorm of static, like an old television with no signal. The Seahawk target split into 12 phantom echoes, some flying backward, others appearing inside the pilot's own cockpit. This was what happens when recycled Russian hardware meets modern American electronic warfare. The ALQ-99 didn't just jam radar, it made it hallucinate. While the Chinese system was still chasing its old frequency, the American jamming signal had already hopped across 50 others. Then something that made the Chinese pilot's blood run cold happened. The warning system showed that the entire United States carrier strike group was locking its radar onto him, like the Eye of Sauron had just noticed his existence. FA-18 Super Hornets had launched not to attack but merely to remind Beijing that the Seahawk was not alone. Behind them was the entire United States Pacific Fleet. The Chinese pilot tried everything, switching frequencies, increasing power, turning his radar off and on, but it was useless. The Seahawk electronic warfare system operated across multiple bands at once, creating what experts call full-spectrum dominance, and what the Chinese pilot called certain death. Meanwhile, the American crew remained so calm they were probably discussing what to eat for lunch. The battle turned into a free lesson for the United States. With every passing second, intelligence flowed to the United States like a waterfall. Communication protocols showed encryption China had used since 2003 and radar frequencies that had never been updated since they bought the Russian design. Even the sound of the rotor blades was recorded to allow identification from 80 kilometers by sound alone. The Chinese pilot had not yet stopped making mistakes. When he closed to within 500 meters, he could clearly see the American door gunner manning the GAW 21 caliber 12.7 millimeter machine gun, not yet aimed at him. But the message was plain. The Z-10 began aggressive aerobatic maneuvers trying to force the Seahawk into a bad firing position. But its fragile, overloaded airframe bled speed and shook violently. Meanwhile, the Seahawk, built on the Black Hawk platform, remained perfectly stable. The American AAR-47 warning system logged the Z-10's entire flight dynamics, a turn rate of 20 degrees per second, and a climb rate of 12 meters per second, enough to build a detailed flight profile to program future interceptor missiles. Infrared cameras recorded heat signatures from exhaust ports at 450 degrees Celsius to transmission housings at 180 degrees Celsius, telling American engineers exactly where heat-seeking missiles should aim. The Z-10 was turning itself into a training model for its adversary. The Z-10 23mm cannon of the Z-10 is effective only at a range of 2.5 kilometers against ground targets, while the GAU-21 of the United States can penetrate armor at a close range of nearly 2 kilometers, enough to tear the Z-10 fuselage like paper. The warning lights on the Chinese control panel lit up like a Christmas tree. Systems overloaded, responses slowed, and the airframe was almost coming apart. Still, the pilot recklessly pushed power to 105%, hoping to salvage the situation. Each time he switched his radar on, each time he tried to lock a target, he accidentally fed the Americans more golden data. It was like someone trying the wrong password 14 times, while the other side was writing down every keystroke. When China activated its laser designation system, American sensors immediately identified the model and the software version, which meant they had learned how to disable that entire class of equipment across every Chinese platform. One encounter and an entire generation of Chinese weapons was exposed. The Z-10 engines overheated, producing an infrared bloom 40% stronger, recorded in detail by American cameras to program new heat-seeking missile seekers. Radio communications were intercepted in full by the United States. The frequency hopping pattern was far too predictable, allowing the Americans to anticipate and jam the entire Chinese military communications network in the area. The Z-10 gradually lost hydraulic pressure, ran too hot, and flight controls became sluggish. 3:42 in the afternoon, the Chinese pilot watched the American sonar splash into the water. Again, the submarine remained tracked, and 72 minutes of posturing turned into 72 minutes of humiliation. He hesitated, unsure whether to report the failure, but then realized that ground command was seeing the exact same radar picture. In those 72 minutes, the United States collected a vast treasure of intelligence, knowing which frequencies to jam, where to hit thermal signatures, and what tactics to employ. The message to Beijing was brutally clear. Your weapons are still too immature, goodbye.